I'm Andrew Krysa, and this is Robert Conrad, my colleague at the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And we've been around since 1895 or something like that, like a long time, yeah. So, yeah, I think almost 150, or it was 150 years, like last year, I think. Anyway, we're both the education directors of at RASC, Vancouver. So we do a lot of these kind of presentations, most of them live. I'm not really so good at these Zoom presentations, but we've done a few of those, and we go to schools, we go to different organizations with adults, and just a lot of it is just basic observational astronomy that we teach to people that really know basically nothing about astronomy. So we've kind of based this presentation on that same kind of precept, that we're just going to take you from point A and slowly take you through some of the basics of astronomy. I don't know if you can use that in your organization. If you're out at night with your, apparently you have spotting scopes that you can use, or maybe binoculars, or some of these things you can even see with your naked eye, or we'll even explain to you how things move in the night sky, how you see different constellations at different times of the year. Just like our ancestors used to be very in tune with that when the moon phases were happening. I don't even think people today know if they look up at the moon, whether it's waxing or waning, or, but you know, our ancestors were very in tune with the motion of constellations, helped them to know what time of the year it was, when to plant things, when to have ceremonies. You know, back then there wasn't any light pollution. People had nothing else better to do at night but look at the stars, make up stories in the shapes that they saw in the stars that developed into our modern constellations that we use today. So anyway, we'll just take you through that. Yeah, without further ado, I think Robert, yeah, there you go.
All right, so the reason why we have this.
So I'll just interrupt for a moment, Robert. You've still got that gray window obscuring your top line of text there.
Oh, how about now? Good.
That's much better.
Oh yeah, somebody entered something in the chat, so it kind of stayed there. All right. So this quote here by Abraham Lincoln basically is one of my favorite, and I usually start off a lot of presentations with this, either this quote or another quote by Einstein, but this time I chose Abraham Lincoln. Basically, he says, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening an axe." And that goes a lot to say about how much preparation goes into planning. So this topic is really focused on observational astronomy. And I mean, there are days where I'll spend, you know, maybe 5 hours actually planning on what I'm going to observe, when I'm going to observe it. And that's important because objects, you know, when they're high in the sky are much more beautiful to look at and higher contrast and easier to see than when they're lower in the horizon. And there's things like asteroids and comets that are happening in the sky. There might be a supernova that's recently gone off, 1 or 2 of those. And there's International Space Station passes and other satellite passes. So there's really a lot of planning. And basically the bottom line is there are some times where I'll spend more time actually planning my observing session than I actually spend out there in the field. And I think some of that will become a little apparent as we go through the presentation.
Did you make that little drawing there?
No, I wish I'm not even that good of a nurse.
I know, I thought it was Washington that chopped up the street, but anyway.
All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different tools that can help you learn the night sky. And obviously with technology, there's a lot more today than there was, you know, 50 years ago. So the first image that you see here is a program called Stellarium. And I can't really stress how much of an educational tool that Stellarium is. It can help you learn the night sky anywhere on Earth. You can put yourself anywhere on the planet, thousands of years in the past and thousands of years in the future, to actually see what's happening in the cosmos. Thanks to scientists, these things are very predictable. So we know, you know, how they operated thousands of years ago and how they're going to operate thousands of years in the future. You can also use this program to even control your telescope. There are observatories, multi-million-dollar observatories that actually use programs like Stellarium to actually control their telescopes. And this is a free program that you can download for either Mac, PC. There's even a version, of course, not as robust as the PC version or Mac version, but you can actually download a version for your mobile phone. And again, it's free. So really a great educational tool. And I will be taking you on a little bit of a tour of that program a little bit later on. The second image that you see here is something called a planisphere. Before we had computer programs, that was basically kind of what people used. And it basically, you'll see on the outside of the circle, there's the time and date, and you basically just move it to that time and date, and it shows you what the sky would look like at that point in time. The third picture here that you see is a monthly sky map, and you can go on, just Google monthly sky map, and you can find these. The only caveat that I would say about these is they're very limited in the sense that they show you what's visible in the sky up until about maybe 10 p.m., but they don't show you what's visible, from 10 p.m. until the morning time. And in the wintertime, that's a lot of constellations that you would see that's missing from these monthly sky maps. So just be aware of that. And then down below, these two pictures here that I'm kind of moving my arrow around, these are apps that you can install on your phone or your iPad or MacBook, whatever you have. And there's not just apps that show you kind of what the sky looks like, kind of like a planetarium, but there's also apps that tell you, when the planets are visible, when's the best time to view them. There are sky atlases that are available. There's even tools that will simulate what your telescope would look like if you were looking through it. So many different apps. If you're curious one night and you're bored, just go into the App Store in either Google or iPhone and just Google astronomy, and you'll see there's a whole slew of different apps that could actually help you learn astronomy and make the most of it. And then just the final image here, you'll see is something called a pocket sky atlas. And that is basically kind of a standard star chart that shows you all the different constellations and objects of interest within those constellations. And there's lots of different atlases out there. This is one of the more popular ones called Pocket Sky Atlas.
The shapes of the constellations, which stars, so you can look and see that,
And it's really good for naked eye observing. And you could probably push it maybe to binoculars, but not really good for telescope viewing. That's more, you get into even more detailed charts for that. So that's why I want this there. And then a final sort of tool or resource that you have is Starry Nights on Burnaby Mountain campus. Every Friday night, assuming that it's clear, they open up what's known as the Attendant Observatory, and you can go in there and look through that big monolith of a telescope. And also, what's kind of unique about Starry Nights is that outside, while you're waiting to go inside to the observatory and observe, there are many of the RASC members there with their own telescopes. So if you're interested in buying a telescope, or if you join RASC, you can actually rent a telescope from RASC. You get to survey all the different types of telescopes that are visible or available, and that can help you. If you, again, sometimes people just go and buy any telescope, but if you go to Starry Nights, you'll get a chance to see all different types of telescopes and get to, I'm sure that people who are demonstrating the telescopes will let you kind of, use them, and you get a feel for, what's visible in those telescopes and how they operate. So really, really great resource there. And it's free. You don't have to be a RASC member, anything like that to join those events.
And obviously it has to be clear
of course,
on those Friday nights. So.
Yeah. And just right now, just so you know, that the last Friday of the month, Andrew will love this, is virtual Starry Nights. And that'll be the case maybe for the next couple of months. And then I think once we get closer into the summer, it'll probably be every Friday night in person at Starry Nights.
Right. And there it is, 1868 is when RASC started. Well, 1 year after Confederation.
Yep.
Okay, and then.
And then I have a Facebook group. It's got about 2,200 members or something like, or 1,200 members. And this is valuable because I post there every day, or even sometimes multiple times a day, different things that are happening of interest in the night sky. And this isn't really a beginner thing, because I don't talk about, oh, okay, Jupiter's visible tonight. This is really for like things like asteroids and comets. It's a little bit more advanced, but if you're at that level or you want to get to that level, definitely a good group to join. So that's all I wanted to say about that. You could just simply Google Whistler Astronomy Club and it'll come up. And Andrew.
Yeah, so we'll just go into quickly some things that you can observe in the night sky, either naked eye or with binoculars or with a telescope or with your viewing scopes that you have. First object here is a galaxy. We live within a galaxy called the Milky Way that has 200 to 400 billion stars in it. But we can also see other neighboring galaxies to the Milky Way, like Andromeda is even visible with the naked eye for about 8 or 9 months of the year, like winter, late fall, early spring. You can see it in the constellation Andromeda. You can actually see it as a little fuzzy spot if you really look and your eyes are very good. You can see it with the naked eye. With binoculars, you can see it better. With your viewing scopes, you can see it quite well. If you were in the southern hemisphere, you could see two smaller galaxies that are even closer to the Milky Way. They're called the Large and the Small Magellanic Cloud, and they're quite brilliant and visible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, we can't see them at our latitude in the north here. This is another example of a galaxy here, the Needle Galaxy. This is something you would actually need a telescope to see. You can also see planetary nebulas like this one here, which is called the Cat's Eye Nebula. Planetary nebulas are stars that are about the size of our sun that have exploded. They've blown off their outer shell of gases, and the white dwarf that's left in the center lights up the gases. Different gases glow in different colors, and you can see beautiful shapes and they're quite fascinating to look at. You can obviously look at the moon with your naked eye. You can be more aware of the phases that the moon is in during the month. With binoculars, you can actually see more detail on the moon. You can see, things like crater walls and mountains, and with your telescope, even better. Another thing you can see with binoculars, or certainly with your viewing scopes, or very well with a telescope, are globular clusters. They're quite beautiful things to look at in the night sky. They actually predate galaxies. They're very, very ancient structures, probably like billions and billions of years old. And they're just collections of millions of stars that are bound together by gravity. And this is probably M13, or probably that Tuscany one in the southern hemisphere that we can't see from here. But anyway, there's about 100 or so of them that orbit around the Milky Way. And you can see these. And these you would have to find by knowing where constellations are. So that's a good reason to know your constellations, which we'll show you in a few tiles later on. And something that's very easy to see with the naked eye, but comes out better with binoculars or viewing scopes. You can look at the planets. The ones that are visible to the naked eye are, well, Mercury just barely, but Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. In a telescope, you can also see Uranus and Neptune. In your binoculars or with your viewing scopes, you can actually see the moons of Jupiter, the 4 major moons of Jupiter. You could see Titan, the major moon of Saturn. So lots of interesting things to see and look at. But again, you need to know the constellations to know where to find these things. You can't just go out and say, well, you kind of have to know in which part of the sky that you're looking. And we use constellations to do that.
Oh, and I just want to add one thing about the moon too as well. I want to say it in case I don't get a chance later. And that is, a lot of people think that the best time to go to view the moon is when it's full, but that's actually the opposite, because when the moon is full, it's so bright, you don't actually see a lot of the contrast and shadows and the stuff that Andrew was talking about, like, craters with mountains in them. You don't see any of that. So the best time to view the moon is when it's in between
because
phases.
then those things actually cast shadows and show contrast, and you can, yeah, the full moon looks actually quite flat. Anyway, so locating stars and constellations. So if this was a live presentation, I'd be asking the audience, can you name any constellations that you can actually identify in the sky?
They still can, because they could just unmute themselves.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So if somebody wants to unmute and tell me any constellation that you can actually identify yourself in the night sky, does anybody know of any? Yes, no? Okay. Well, I think most people would probably say, I would say 90 or 95% of the people on the Earth would probably say that they recognize this shape here, the Big Dipper, which if you look to the north, you can always see. And it's this collection of 7 stars here. But that's actually not a constellation. That is actually part of a constellation. So it's called an asterism, which is a collection of stars that form a shape, but they're not actually an official constellation. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So somebody said the Big Dipper. That's good. Orion. Yeah, Orion's very, very recognizable shape, of course. Yeah. Somebody, Jennifer, Big Dipper, Cassiopeia. Great. Summer Triangle. So Summer Triangle, Big Dipper. Those are, can you put that back up again? So just for Jennifer, the Cassiopeia is a constellation. Orion is a constellation. Taurus is a constellation. Auriga. The Pleiades isn't a constellation. It's actually a star cluster that you can see in Taurus or just near Taurus. And the Big Dipper, like I was explaining here, is actually part of Ursa Major, which is the constellation. It's the back part, the hind part of the bear. The actual constellation is all of these stars here, which are the legs of the bear here, the body, the snout, and the back part of the bear. Ursa Major in Latin means big bear. And the Summer Triangle also is an asterism. It's actually part of 3 other official constellations that form the Summer Triangle. But good, yeah, that you recognize those shapes in the sky. That's great. So why don't we start then with the Big Dipper, which is not a constellation, but it's an asterism, and we can use that to start a sort of a journey of or a discovery of more constellations in the sky. We can use that as a starting point. So also just quickly, we can show you that we use constellation as signposts or as markers to find other things, such as if you looked at the Big Dipper here, if you pointed your telescope sort of up from this end star, I think that's Dubhe, in the Big Dipper, about this distance, and if you sort of wiggled your scope around, you'd eventually find 2 little tiny fuzzy spots, and those are 2 galaxies called M81 and M82 that you said you can actually see with the naked eye.
Binoculars.
Yeah, binoculars, yeah.
In a dark location.
Yes, you can actually see those with binoculars in a dark location, so you could certainly see them with your finder scopes or viewing scopes, sorry. And they're 2 galaxies that look very close to each other to us, and they actually appear in a wide field of view. You can see both of them together. So to find these, you couldn't just point anywhere in the sky. You'd have to actually go to the Big Dipper to use it as a locator, and then go from that star, either star hop or just point your telescope kind of in this direction and find those. But I'm going to start you on a little thing that I think a lot of beginners use, and certainly this is what my father taught me when I was a little kid to start me off with astronomy. If you take the Big Dipper, you can actually start to find, identify other constellations in the sky by using the Big Dipper. You can also use Orion, but Orion's not visible all year round. The Big Dipper is visible all year round, and we'll see a little bit later why the Big Dipper is visible 12 months out of the year. But here's a little trick to find another constellation by using the Big Dipper, which you can easily find the Big Dipper. When you find it, you can see the two end stars of the bucket in the Big Dipper called Dubhe and Merit. And if you draw a line through those two stars and follow it about 5 times the distance that Merit and Dubhe are from each other along that line until you come to the first brightest star, that's Polaris. So Polaris is unique because a lot of people think it's the brightest star in the sky, but that's not the peculiarity about Polaris. The peculiarity about Polaris is that it is always in the same place in the sky. Everything that moves in the sky seems to move around Polaris. And again, we'll see that further down in a few tiles when we look at the movement of constellations and how they move and why they move that way. But once you found Polaris, Polaris is the end star in the handle of the Little Dipper, or Ursa Minor, which is the little bear. So it's actually the little bear cub of the big bear that the Big Dipper belongs to. And it's sort of in this position. So there's a good homework project for people that maybe want to locate more constellations. You can go out the next clear night and you can use this little trick to find another constellation, the Little Dipper, and then you can actually go a little bit further and you can find a third constellation the same way that you found Polaris by using the Big Dipper. If you go opposite from the handle of the Big Dipper through Polaris and almost the same distance to the other side, you see another, and I see some people mention Cassiopeia in their answers to constellations that people know, and it's the big W in the sky that you see. So that is supposed to be a queen, Queen Cassiopeia. I think she was queen of Ethiopia. Anyway, those are the 5 major stars of Cassiopeia, but all of these constellations have more stars that belong to them, but we're just kind of showing you the brightest, most recognizable stars of those constellations. So there, right away, you can find 3 constellations in the sky just by using this little exercise here. And if you want to go even further, you can use the Big Dipper to find other constellations too, like Bootes, which is visible about 9 months of the year, from late summer, fall through the winter. If you use the handle of the Big Dipper and follow the arc down to the next biggest, brightest star that you can see, it's the brightest star in the constellation Bootes. It's this kite-shaped constellation, and it's supposed to represent a plowman or a herdsman. So there's another constellation that you can find. So people say arc down to Arcturus by using the handle. And then if you go even further, you can find a constellation that's visible sort of late spring, early summer, Virgo. You can arc down to Arcturus and then spike down to Spica by following that same curve that the handle makes. And that's the next brightest star you find along that curve. And it's actually the brightest star in the constellation Virgo. That's not a very good representation of what Virgo looks like, but it's just showing you how you can find the brightest star in Virgo. Also, you could, in the spring or early summer, when you can see the constellation Leo, you can also use the Big Dipper, these 2 stars in the bucket of the Big Dipper, to follow along. At that time, at around 9 or 10 o'clock at night in the late spring, early summer, you'll see Ursa Major sort of in this position to the far north. So if you follow that star and make a line, you probably have to follow it towards the south. You'll find Regulus, which is another bright star. It's the brightest star in the constellation Leo. which actually does look like this. These are the brightest stars in the constellation Leo, and it sort of looks like a sphinx. This is the head of the lion. This is the body of the lion lying down, sort of like a sphinx. These are sort of like the back legs of the lion. And this is actually quite a beautiful constellation that's very easily recognizable in the sky. When you see it, it's very easy to recognize this shape in the sky.
And Andrew was talking about how in Ursa Major we can see two galaxies, relatively bright galaxies in one eyepiece field of view, M81, M82. In Leo, there's one that's unique. You can actually see, it's called the Leo triplet, and you can actually see, you can see three galaxies which are relatively bright in one eyepiece field of view.
And that's down here at the bottom of the body. So again, you're using constellations as markers to find objects that you might want to look at. I mean, the constellations are beautiful just to know and look at themselves, but they're also useful to find other things that you might want to look for in the night sky. So now we'll show you also how to become more cognizant of how the constellations move, because they're not always in the same space, or they're not always visible at all times of the year, except for constellations in the far north, like the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia. And we'll see why in a minute with my demonstrations, why you can see those constellations all year round. But most constellations you can only see at certain times of the year. Common ones when doing geology fieldwork in the 1980s, but in Vancouver, I can barely see stars. Yeah, that's Jennifer posting about how she's familiar with a lot of these constellations, but they're hard to see in Vancouver. Yes and no. I wouldn't be able to see the Little Dipper very well in Vancouver, but I've kind of seen Butes in downtown Vancouver, and I can see some other constellations like Pegasus quite well, like brighter ones. I think I've even seen most of Leo from Vancouver, but if you really want to see the constellations well, and even the Milky Way, Porto Cove is a good place to go. That's where Robert and I often go to observe. It's probably the closest really dark sky area to downtown Vancouver. Also, where do all the people in Langley or whatever go? There's another Hope, but there's Manning Park. Yeah, it's another dark sky area. If you're further east to observe some of these constellations. So I'm just going to go through quickly with you the motion of the constellations, why we see them move the way we do, just very quickly. So this is a representation of the celestial sphere, which is, if we look out at the night sky, to us, it's an illusion. A lot of these things we see are illusions and not really what they are in reality. But to us, it looks like all the stars are the same distance painted on a sphere that surrounds the Earth or our solar system, more realistically. But in real life, they're not really all equidistant. Some stars are much closer to us, some stars and objects are much further away. The Andromeda Galaxy is 2.5 million light years away. Some stars are only a dozen or less light years away. Other stars might be 100 or 200 or 300 light years away. They're all at different distances, but to us, they look like they're all the same distance painted on a sphere that surrounds us. And if the sun, and even if the Earth weren't away and we were just floating in space where the Earth was, we'd be able to look all around and see all the constellations that we see all year round. And all the constellations, if we look down, that you could see in the southern hemisphere, we could see all the constellations all at once. But unfortunately, or fortunately, the sun is kind of in our way half the day. And it's also blocking half the constellations that are visible on this celestial sphere for half the year.
Right, you're full screen. So.
Oh, am I?
Yeah. It doesn't look good to you, but for them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I mean, if this is the Earth and that light behind, we were trying to show that light behind if that were the sun. So this is the night side of the Earth at this point is looking at the stars that are on this side of our solar system, and all the constellations that are on the other side of the celestial sphere are blocked in the daytime to us by the sun. So we basically just see these constellations that are on this side of the Earth or of the solar system at any time of the year. And as the sun moves around the Earth, then further constellations become visible later on in the year, month by month, and ones that we saw before drop off and are not visible as the Earth travels around the sun. So let's go to that next tile. Yeah, so if we go to this next tile, here's a representation of where the sun is and what part of that celestial sphere we're looking at any time of the year. So here is February 21st. Today's February 22nd. So we're basically at this point in the sun's travel around the sun. At the Earth's travel around the sun at this time of year. So the backside, the night side of the Earth is looking at these constellations or this part of the celestial sphere at this time of the year. So because the Earth spins on its axis, that's another illusion. That's the stars are fixed. They're not moving. They're not rising. Really, it's an illusion caused by the spin of the Earth on its axis, just like the sun isn't rising in the east and setting in the west. It's an illusion caused by the rotation of the Earth on its axis. It's the same thing with the stars that we see surrounding our solar system. It's the same thing. So as on February 21st, as the dark side of the Earth is rotating from west to east, we see constellations rising in the east. So Gemini, after sunset, would rise in the east, and then later we would see Cancer rising, and then we'd see Leo rising, and then we'd see Virgo rising, and then slowly we'd see Gemini setting in the west at that time, and then Libra would rise, and then Scorpio and Sagittarius just before sunrise would start rising in the east, and Gemini would have set, and Cancer would be starting to set at this point, and it's all caused by the rotation of the Earth around its axis. And then, as the Earth rotates on its axis towards the sun, then we don't see these constellations that are on the other side. But as the Earth travels around 180 degrees later, we're on the other side, we're at August 21st, then we would see these constellations, which are considered summer constellations. So Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries are the constellations that we see rising in the east and setting in the west at that time of the year. And these constellations that we saw in our time now in February, in late winter, early spring, would be on the other side of the sun to us and not visible.
Quiz question for everyone.
Yes, sure.
All right. So based on what Andrew just said, let's test your understanding. So let's say that the sun wasn't visible at all during the day. So but let's say we had no sun. Right. How long would it take you to see all of the constellations? Not just these zodiac, but actually any of the constellations. How many weeks, months, years, days, hours? What do you think? How long? I'll just check the chat, see if anyone puts an answer in.
24 hours.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
24 hours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, exactly, perfect. But in reality, it takes us 365 days or the whole year to see the whole celestial sphere as the Earth travels around the sun, right? So again, these ecliptic constellations are the ones that we know from astrology, are basically, if you extended the Earth's equator out onto the celestial sphere, so they're basically the equatorial constellations that we can see. So you can see constellations above that. You can see constellations a little bit below that ecliptic, but the ecliptic for us, at 49 degrees above the equator, we can see this ecliptic line to us looks like rising in the east, going up at an angle almost 45 degrees to 49 degrees above the horizon, because we're 49 degrees up from the equator at due south, and then from not 49 degrees straight up, they would fall down or descend down to the west and you know, set there. So this same ecliptic line, because it's we're projecting the equator out onto the onto that celestial sphere, also includes the plane of the solar system. All the planets are in that same plane, also the sun and the moon. So along that same ecliptic line, where you see all those ecliptic constellations, is where you'll find the planets. They're not just willy-nilly anywhere. They're always somewhere along that ecliptic. When they're on the same side of the sun as us and they're visible to us, they'll be somewhere in one of those constellations along the ecliptic. Just as the sun travels that same ecliptic 49 degrees up and sets at our location here in Vancouver, it's the same with those ecliptic constellations.
So that's another way you can kind of quiz yourself too, to learn the constellation. So if you see a planet Jupiter, you can ask yourself right away, okay, it's got to be in one of the zodiac constellations. So tonight,
if it's visible.
Yeah, if it's visible, what constellation is it in? Same thing with the moon. The moon travels between constellations. So, and sometimes the moon, it depends on the size of the constellation, but sometimes the moon will spend 1 day, 2 days, even sometimes up to 3 days within one constellation, right? So you can use that again to kind of quiz yourself. So anytime you see a moon or a planet, it has to be in one of those zodiac constellations. The moon, yeah.
It has to be in one of those zodiac constellations, because they travel in that same plane. You know, if you extend the equator out.
And there's one exception to that, and that's a constellation called Ophiuchus. And that it was meant to actually be one of the zodiac 13th zodiac constellation. But you can look that one up.
So just a quick question: how many official constellations do you think there are that can be seen from the Earth, southern and northern hemisphere? How many official constellations are there total, north and southern hemisphere altogether? Any answers there?
No. Yeah,
no?
there's right here. Click it.
Yeah. 12. Well, there's 12. Yeah, there's 12 zodiac constellations, but all the constellations altogether, the ones that are above the zodiac or below the zodiac or straight up north or straight up south from the southern hemisphere, there's actually more than 12. Yeah, so there's actually 88 constellations altogether, and they all have sort of straight border lines between them. They sort of fit together like jigsaw puzzles on the celestial sphere all around us. But from where we are, we can see about 54 or 55 of those constellations. And in the southern hemisphere, they can see the ecliptic constellations. In the northern hemisphere, we can see the ecliptic constellations. It's just in the southern hemisphere, and I've been there many times, you see those the ecliptic constellations, but they're upside down, as is the moon looks upside down in Australia to what it looks like to somebody looking at it from Vancouver. And then you see a whole different set of constellations toward the south. But anyway, I digress, I guess. But there are a certain amount of constellations, like I said, that you can see all year round. And that's because if we take this, should we put me in that view again, or?
Yeah, sure.
If we take this again, yeah, you can see the celestial sphere around here, and the back part of the celestial sphere behind the sun you can't see for half the year or more than half the year. But if you're looking out this way or out from the equator, yes. But if you're looking straight up north or towards the north, even as the sun is moving around the, as the Earth is moving around the sun, there's nothing getting in the way of the northern constellations there. You're always able to see them. So as long as it's nighttime, you'll be able to see all the northern, the circumpolar constellations they're called.
Why are they called circumpolar, Alan?
Because they circulate around the polar star, around Polaris.
And clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Anti-clockwise. So let's go back to that tile.
Sure.
So if you were in the far north, where it's like in the middle of winter, where it's nighttime 24 hours a day, you would actually see this full rotation of these circumpolar constellations in a 24-hour period. But further down south where we are, we'd see it, you know, at depending on how long the night is, 14 hours or 8 hours or 16 hours, you'd see that rotation you know, happen. If it was a 12-hour night, you'd see a rotation of 180 degrees of these constellations around Polaris. And again, because the North Pole points straight out an imaginary line towards Polaris, to us, it looks like Polaris is standing still. The other stars look like they're spinning, again, an illusion caused by the rotation of the Earth around its axis.
And I should mention one more thing too, just to add to that, just so we don't paint a bit of you know, accurate picture. In the north, they rotate anti-clockwise within a 24-hour period, but it doesn't mean that if I go out any time of night, I can see all the circumpolar constellations, because that's where topography comes in. Because if you're in an area where you live by the mountains, you might have to wait for a couple of hours, because if Cassiopeia is at the bottom of that circle, you might not be able to see from the mountain. So you might have to wait a couple of hours before it starts to rise a bit more.
Right. Yeah, or big trees in the way.
Exactly.
But I think that the Ursa Minor would probably be visible almost anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think you'd have much
Pretty
block,
high
well,
up
other
there.
than trees, but like
Yeah.
you wouldn't, even mountainscape should
Yeah.
not block that.
Yeah, but that's a good point. And also they are also, because of the motion of the Earth around the sun, another motion that's happening, you do see these circumpolar constellations at different positions at different times of the year at a certain time. So this is just a representation of at 9 p.m. what you would see in the where you would see the Big Dipper in at 9 p.m. in the middle of that season. So in the middle of summer at 9 p.m. you'd see the Big Dipper in this position. If you looked out at 9 p.m. in the middle of fall, you'd see the Big Dipper in this position. At 9 p.m. in the winter, you'd see it standing up on its handle. And this is where you'd see it at 9 p.m. in the middle of spring. So there is also another motion. They seem to spin around I know this is a little hard to conceptualize, but they spin around, you know, in a 24-hour period. But they also, because of the movement around the sun, they make another sort of a slower spin around within that spin in a 365-day period. But this all to say that you can use the circumpolar constellations, barring any mountains or big trees in the way. Pretty much any time of the year you can see them, and you can use them as markers or see them, or unlike the ecliptic constellations, which you can only see certain times of the year. Okay, so.
All right, so just what Andrew talked about, we're going to use that program that I was talking about, the free program that you can download called Stellarium, just to kind of cover, you know, to give a visual to what Andrew was talking about. So let me share Stellarium. Can you just, somebody let me know if you could see stellarium? Just want to make sure that you can.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. And if I move my mouse around, can you see the sky move?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. Excellent. All right. So let me start where Andrew started, which is we were talking about the fact that the constellations rise in the east. So there, sunset. There we go. So just after sunset, you can see that Leo is rising in the east. And if I increase the time, you can see that there's Leo, and then, oh, there's Virgo rising. Oh, there's Libra, the next constellation. That other zodiac constellation, the 13th that I was talking about, Ophiuchus, there it is there. So again, we know that the constellations rise, and you can see there that they do tend to rise at a bit of an angle. It's really like a parabola, but another way to think about it, if you're not familiar with parabolas, is just kind of like at a 45-degree angle. They rise out of the east. They then travel across the south, and this is the important point. They actually reach their highest point in the sky as they cross this line, this imaginary line called the meridian line, which runs north-south or south-north through the zenith, which is the point directly overhead. So why that's relevant and important is because, well, actually just right here, you can see where the Leo triplet is, somewhere in this range here. I want to make sure that when I'm observing things like galaxies or nebulae, things that are quite faint, that I'm observing them when they're in south. Because if they're in south, they're at their highest point they can possibly be. And it doesn't matter. That doesn't change given the time of year, right? They will always reach their highest point when they cross south.
Oh, and notice that the moon is where it should be, somewhere near the ecliptic, right?
That's right. And
Just
which
like-
constellation is
Well, you tell me,
it? Leo, right?
right?
Yeah.
Well, or between Leo and Cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like the planets would be along this line somewhere. The sun also travels in this line. Yeah.
Yeah. You can see. So when you get into stellarium, you can add these two lines, meridian line and ecliptic. Very valuable to have. And I'm actually going to share a link with you to a bunch of resources that I created over the years. So near the end of the presentation, I'm going to share the link. It's the same link that I share with all my classes, and it's got all the resources that you'd ever want in one spot. It's in my Google Drive, so I'll be sending you that link later. All right, so we're in south, and then as Andrew mentioned, the constellations then set in the west, right? So here's west, and again, you can see Cancer and Gemini and Orion setting. You can see they're going down at about a 45-degree angle. There's Leo taking a nosedive into the west. So those are your rise in the east, reach their highest point in the south, and set in the west. But now we have one compass direction left, and that's north, the very unique one, where the constellations travel anti-clockwise around Polaris, and we'll just keep day and night on at the same, so you can see. And so some of the circumpolar constellations, other than Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, include Draco, the dragon, Cepheus is a king.
There's Cassiopeia.
Yeah. Camilo Pardalis, which is a giraffe. And I don't know, did I say Draco the dragon?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So those are your circumpolar constellations. And the circumpolar constellations change depending on your latitude. And the definition of a circumpolar constellation is not just one that travels, and this is important, there's two things that make up a circumpolar constellation. One is, as Andrew mentioned, they travel anti-clockwise around Polaris, right? 24 hours a day, they make 360-degree rotation. But the other part of being a circumpolar constellation is that any given point, the constellation never dips below the horizon. So you can see even the tip of the end of Ursa Major kind of almost looks like it grazes the ground, but it will never, ever dip below the horizon. Same thing you can see with Draco.
From our latitude.
Yeah, from our latitude, and Cepheus. But if I were to drop down to, say, Mexico or even Arizona, you might see that part of Cepheus would actually dip below the horizon. So in Arizona, Cepheus might not be a circumpolar constellation, right? So it changes depending on where you are on Earth. yeah, so that's basically all I wanted to show you there. So I'll stop that. Let me see where we are in.
Oh, show them, go back to,
Sure.
can you go back
Yeah.
to Starry? Just,
You can show 'em, sure.
yeah, if we,
There's
just
Bouquets.
yeah, just there's Butes. So that when we showed you to arc down to Arcturus, there's Butes, the herdsman. That's actually more kind of like what Virgo would look like, the shape that you're looking for. I think they just showed this kind of part here, yeah. And there's Leo, the shape of the lion with the lion's head and the body and the back haunches sort of sitting down. And also Gemini is very recognizable as the Castor and Pollux, the heads of the two twins.
And actually just hit this button.
Yeah, that's true. You can see the, yeah.
Turn on the mythological.
So you can see sort of what it represents there, yeah. And yeah.
So that's why you can see already why Stellarium is such a really good educational and learning tool, right?
And also, so if we go back a few months, this is the month,
right, yeah.
So let's go back to like December or November, then we should be able to see, well, there's Pegasus, isn't it? Yeah, that's Pegasus, the big square, which I said I can see that very often in downtown Vancouver. It seems to be pretty visible, bright. But I'm just looking for, where is Taurus? Right there. So just, yeah, I just wanted to show them the Pleiades.
Yeah, it's right. Zoom in a bit.
Zoom in, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so that's quite a beautiful thing that you can see with the naked eye. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it's visible when Taurus is visible. So that's another, you would have to find this bright star Aldebaran, and these are sort of like the horns of Taurus, and I guess the body down here, and off to the side here is where you see this, with the naked eye, you can see 7 bright stars. From the Greek, they're called the Pleiades, but other cultures call them something different, like Subaru in Japanese, or you know.
I'll just show you.
And I also wanted to show them.
Yeah, just give you an idea, because you probably recognize if I go here, this is kind of what it looks like in a telescope eyepiece view, and then this is what it looks like in a pair of binoculars.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can see it quite well with the naked eye. That's something you can just look up and see. It's actually quite beautiful and quite easy to. And why am I not seeing Orion? Can we just put in?
Oh, just zoom out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
It should be just around Taurus.
Okay, just
yeah.
There you go.
And then zoom in.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think everybody can recognize this shape, the 3 belt stars, this Betelgeuse, the red giant, you know, the sort of the square that's around there. So that's another very recognizable constellation that's visible about 8 months of the year, 7 months of the year, something like that, more in the winter, from October until about maybe March, I guess. You can probably still see it very late. Yeah.
A lot of the time, it really depends on what time of night. Like when we say you can see it, like when Andrew says we can see it until March or whatever, or even maybe April. Well, it depends on what time of night. Like you might have to get up at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. But that's just the way it works, right?
Depending how far they are between the circumpolar constellations and the ecliptic, the closer they are to the circumpolar, the longer they're visible throughout the year. But also within Orion, you can see the Orion Nebula here. That's a very interesting thing to look at. I think even in the viewing scopes, or even in the binocular, it looks like quite an interesting thing here. So if you point it sort of, I think it's supposed to be at the end of his sword, but they're just below the 3 stars in the belt. is the Orion Nebula, which is another beautiful thing to look at. So again, it's another way of using constellations to find things that you can view.
Excellent. So I think that's a good stopping point to start with questions, since we're at the top of the hour. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'm just going to grab that link and send it to you in the chat. Invaluable resource. Thousands of hours put into creating this, and I'm going to share them with you in just a moment. So feel free to just unmute your microphone and ask any questions that you might have. Or any comments as well.
Right. Well, I'll make an observation, not a question really, but that was a great talk. Thanks, guys. And Orion is definitely something you can see quite well in a spotting scope and binoculars. One thing I noticed is you posted some really pretty pictures early on of galaxies and other things, but didn't comment that of course is not at all what they look like.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that. I completely forgot to say that.
Yeah,
actually.
so I mean,
those are very nice Hubble images of things that you can see in the night sky. But yeah, I always mention that. I don't know why I forgot to mention it this time. Thanks, Harvey. Yeah, that is not what you're going to see, even in a very good amateur telescope. In a very good amateur telescope, you'll probably see not any color except maybe green, a greenish hue, and not that much detail, and very, very small. Why don't we show them that tile just quickly at N51 then, and that'll illustrate that. What Harvey is saying. It's near the end there, just all the way down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we go here first, again, so by using the Big Dipper, if you go to the N star there, Alkaid, and go down a little bit here, it's very easy to point your telescope at that. You just have to kind of jiggle around in this area, and it'll come into your view or your viewing scope. And look in this position, you'll see two galaxies that are sort of merging with each other. They're called M51. And this is what the Hubble telescope image of it looks like, brilliant colors and very crisp and clear. And you can see the nebula lines and everything. And you can see material being pulled from one galaxy to the other as they merge together. But in a telescope, this is all very small. You can sort of see that the two galaxies are merging together, but it's no color, very kind of gray or white, and very much smaller than this. So even in my telescope and in your viewing scope, you would see something, but it's not going to be anything even close to what you see here. These are like very, very, professional, long exposure images from the Hubble telescope.
So that's why there's in astronomy, there's two types of people, right? There's your astrophotographers that kind of crave this kind of, color and imaging. So they'll spend a lot of time photographing this for like 6 hours and then spend like 2 weeks going into like Photoshop and other, specific astronomy programs and editing it and bringing out the color and doing all kinds of things. And then there's observational observers like myself who get more enjoyment out of just like star hopping and actually finding these objects.
And looking at the things in real life.
Yeah, and looking at them in reality. And of course, the more you know about these objects, then the more wow factor they'll have, right? If you know how far away it is, or like how many stars are in it, and you learn a little bit about it when you actually see it in the eyepiece, and it just kind of looks like a whitish, grayish smudge,
then you can
appreciate it a lot more, right?
The one exception to that I'll note is the moon. The moon is the one object where it looks much better through a telescope than any picture I've ever seen.
Yeah,
that's true.
Really incredible.
Very true.
I actually have a couple of pictures that I took through a small refractor. So I'm going to share my screen here. So you should be able to see this
Yeah.
picture that I took. So this is of M81 and M82, those
Oh, the
two
two that we
galaxies
talked
that you
about.
mentioned in Ursa Major.
Yes.
So we can see those most of the year from here. You can make them out in a small scope. You could probably even make them out in a spotting scope. They'll appear pretty small. This is pretty close to the view that I get when I'm looking through my 15-inch telescope, which is quite big for an amateur telescope. This was taken with a much smaller refractor. It was like a 120 mil refractor. And there's a small little NGC galaxy over here on the left-hand side of the image as well. But you've got I think that's 81, the cigar, and then M82, the face on Bose Nebula. So that's pretty close to the views that I get through my scope. Through a smaller scope, they'd be a little bit fainter. Through a spotting scope, you would just barely see the edge of that galaxy, and then kind of a faint smudge for M82, the face on spiral there. But with the bigger.
But again, when you think that these two galaxies are about 10 million light years from the Earth, and they contain billions of stars, it doesn't matter. You're looking at, even if it just looks like that in your telescope, it's still amazing to just look at those and think about them.
And what's even more is that these objects that Harvey's showing, like these galaxies, what's unique about that is those are the few objects that you can see. There are some other ones like quasars and stuff like that, but galaxies are us peering through our Milky Way spiral arms, looking at a completely another galaxy. When you look up at the sky and you see all the stars, those are part of our galaxy, and even other objects like those globular clusters and like planetary nebulae, and all those, again, open clusters, Pleiades, again, all part of our Milky Way. But when you see these galaxies, you're looking through our galaxy at a completely another galaxy in the universe. And that's really quite a fascinating thing to comprehend.
And even all those stars that we see in the sky are even just a very small part of the Milky Way that we're looking at, a very small part. The rest of it, like the Milky Way that we see at a very dark place, that's sort of looking at the Milky Way edge on, and all those stars are just sort of melding together. You don't even see the single stars to form a haze. And those are quite distant away, but the individual stars that you see, they're all just a very tiny sphere around, and very small fraction of our Milky Way that we see. It's not, just shows you how huge space is.
And so this image here, this is of M31, the Andromeda Galaxy.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that's pretty close to what I can see through my scope. You get a little more detail here in the dust lanes in M31 in the image than I get in my scope, but it's actually pretty close. You can see M110, one of the satellite galaxies of the Andromeda Galaxy, and then M32.
Oh, 32.
32, yeah, 33 is the pinwheel.
Right.
Yeah, so this gives you some idea of the kind of thing you can see through a scope if you look at stuff. And M31 is an incredible object. I mean, it's 4 times the diameter of the full moon in the sky. It's about twice the size of our galaxy. So you said our galaxy might have as many as 400 billion stars. So, you're looking at maybe 600 or so in M31. All we see is this little faint smudge, but it's 2 million light years away, and it still takes so much more room in the sky than the full moon. It's incredible to think about.
And it's destined to collide with our galaxy. Actually, if you go online, you can do some simulation images of what it will look like when that galaxy merges with our galaxy in a couple billion years.
Yeah, but don't hold your breath, because that's like 4 to 5 billion years from now.
The other thing I want to mention too, as well as because Harvey was talking about, it might look like this, you might see this. Let me tell you this, and this is very important, is darkness trumps the size of your telescope. if you can get to an extremely dark location, you will be better off than actually having a bigger telescope. That's how important getting somewhere where it's really dark is. Because some of these things actually do, if you're in an extremely dark location, look much more spectacular than we're actually telling you. But it's, of course, with light pollution, it's hard to get in that environment, right?
So Aaron asks in the chat, for someone just getting started, what would you recommend in terms of looking for a telescope?
Well, I would say definitely try out, go to something like Starry Nights to get an idea of the different types of telescopes that exist and the mounts that exist. But what I will tell you is definitely I would recommend a Dobsonian reflector telescope. So Dobsonian refers to the type of mount, which is basically a lazy Susan, it just spins. So you move left, right. It's also kind of like an azimuth mount. You move your scope up, down, left, right. It's very easy to navigate and find objects using star charts. There is a type of mount that you can get called an equatorial mount. I would not recommend that. I get hundreds and hundreds of times. So many people have problems. And even when you figure out how to use an equatorial mount, it's not an ideal tool for star hopping and finding objects. It's really an imaging type of mount.
Because it stays and it keeps the object in the field of view. It sort of tracks as the object is moving. But for somebody who's just an amateur and not into photography and looking for stuff, that's totally useless. Like it's too complicated to set up. A Dobsonian is just easy. Swap it together. It's done in like 10 minutes. If you have to collimate, that's fine. But
and it's funny too, because a lot of those equatorial mounts that they put on the cheaper telescopes, it actually is pointless, because the idea of an equatorial mount is it tracks the motion of the Earth. But those mounts, the cheaper ones, don't do that, because you need something called a clock drive. You need a motor on it to actually do the tracking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense. If you're into astrophotography, you would not get one of those sort of cheap equatorial German equatorial mounts. You would get a much more involved one. So definitely beginner telescope. I would recommend an 8 to 12 inch reflector telescope on a Dobsonian mount.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that, but I would second Robert's and Andrew's recommendation that you go to the Starry Nights at SFU, or you join the RASC and you borrow telescopes from their loaner telescopes and try them out to see what works well for you. The other thing that worked for me when I started is I went to a local telescope store. The one I went to doesn't exist anymore, but there's still Markarian Fine Optics here in Vancouver, and talk to them and get some advice, and they'll give you good advice. When I went there, I was going to buy one of these little Meade telescopes with a computer on it and whatnot, and spend about $1,000. And the owner of the telescope store said to me, no, spend a quarter of that, buy this 8-inch Dobsonian telescope, and then decide whether you like the hobby. You'll see things a lot better. And that was solid advice. So I do recommend going to a local telescope store and talking to them about the kinds of things you're interested in, and they'll help you find something that suits you.
He's very passionate, that owner at Mercurian, so astronomy, so he won't lead you the wrong way. Yeah. He's more interested in
and his staff are the same.
Yes, yeah.
I wanted to inject some cultural relativism and mention that the constellations are essential to finding your way around star guides, but the stars grouped in constellations are actually unrelated mostly, and different cultures assign them different names.
Yeah, we actually were going to include that in the presentation, and it's just so hard to remember to say everything. But I was going to say that, yes, the Big Dipper actually in Britain is called the Big Plough. They see it as a plow, right? And a lot of the First Nations saw that as a caribou, right? And then others will actually see different shapes, and so we're actually going by Roman, Greco, and Arabic kind of traditions with the official constellations that the Astronomical Society uses, but yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And what's really,
like I said, like the Pleiades, is known as Subaru
Right,
in
right.
Japanese,
Yeah, yeah.
the car company, right?
Uh-huh.
And they have the logo
Right.
of the Pleiades
Right.
on there.
And what's really cool is in Stellarium, there's an area, and actually, if you go in that link that I sent you, I have a Stellarium guide in there that I created. So you can actually go. In Stellarium, you can find out how all the different cultures saw the different constellations.
That's true.
Yeah, so that's really cool too as well. To show you the pictures in the sky of what they have. So check
I
out
wouldn't
that.
say all the different cultures, but quite a few. It's really good. Yeah, and one of your slides also mentioned a revolving male and revolving female, which I guess is from a Navajo legend or something. Your slide with the Big Dipper on it. If you look at it, you'll see that they were I think the Big Dipper was labeled revolving female, and the Little Dipper was revolving male, or the other way around.
No, I don't remember that one.
Oh, yeah, just looking back, I don't.
Denis pointed that out in the chat at the time.
Oh, interesting.
Is it this one?
We can't see your slides right now. You're not
Okay.
sharing, so.
Is it this one?
Hmm.
No.
No.
Oh, I don't see that anymore.
Oh,
It was just before the one where you showed the Big Dipper in its 4 different positions.
Oh, okay. So that's further down. That's here, right here.
oh, there we go.
Revolving female. Oh, revolving male. Oh, interesting. Go back to that.
Yeah.
Ursa Minor is the revolving
Yeah.
female. Well, I would say Cassiopeia would be the female because she's the queen, and
No. Remember, this is from a Navajo story, so they're totally different figures.
Okay.
And I put a link to that to an article in the
Okay.
chat that mentions that.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's something new I learned. All right. Well, there you go.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Oh, for binoculars, what magnification of binoculars would you need to be reasonable for astronomy? Like, we have quite small that are only like 7 times or something.
Well, the ones I use, actually, I'm just gonna share my screen here and share my screen. I'll show you a pair of binoculars that has won many different awards, and it's a good one for astronomy. It's called the Celestron, and the coatings on the are really good. It's 8 by 56. This pair of binoculars right here, 8 by 56, won many different awards and rated in astronomy magazines. I think they're about $200 in that range, but they have they're anti-fog because I think they're nitrogen purged, and they are just the coatings on the objective lenses are very good. So you get a lot of nice good contrast and color. So Celestron also makes other more powerful ones than 8 by 56, but an all around good one. Like they make, I think 15 by 70 is another one that I have. But once you start getting up into bigger ones like this, you kind of need a tripod, as you're probably well aware of, especially when you're looking at the night sky.
So
If I wanted to get a really good pair and spend money, I would get ones. Well, I have binoculars, but I would get what really it can be annoying sometimes is trying to hold them so still and not get that jiggly motion, and then the stars are causing like. But they have ones just like cameras that have motion.
Oh, right.
I would consider that maybe too if you have the money, but it just makes it much more comfortable to look.
So I'll answer this in a slightly different way. For astronomy, because you're looking at very faint things, the thing that matters most really is the light gathering. So Teresa, your binoculars are probably 20 by 7 or something like that. They won't gather very much light. They'll gather a little more than your eye, but not all that much. The standard birding binoculars are 42 millimeter. That's pretty good. You can see a lot in the night sky with those kind of 42 millimeter diameter binoculars. For people who are actually buying binoculars specifically for astronomy, they recommend 50 millimeter, or you know, some of those were 70 millimeter ones in the display that Robert was showing there, just to gather that much more light so you can see faint things better. When it comes to magnification, a little bit more magnification with astronomy helps, but with binoculars, holding things steady is always a problem. Andrew was talking about the same thing. And so for astronomy, again, if you're buying them specifically for that, 10 by binoculars are a good compromise for most people. You would go toward the 10 by magnification. But you know, my binoculars are 8.5 times, and I see lots of stuff in the night sky with them. They're great, and I'm not going to buy a second pair of binoculars in order to do the astronomy. I use mine for both the birding and astronomy, and that works fine. And 8 by 42s or 10 by 42s are perfectly good. You could see quite a lot. But the very small binoculars that have only got a 20 or 30 millimeter objective, they don't gather as much light. And so, and they also don't give you quite the same resolution. So then you don't see things in the sky as well.
And do tripods work well with binoculars?
With some binoculars, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, they do definitely. You still get again. It also depends on the quality. Just like a telescope mount, it depends on the quality of the mount too. If it's flimsy, it'll like with a heavy pair of binoculars, it'll shake. And the other thing too is they're kind of hard when you want to point near zenith. They don't work too well because if you think about it, right, they do have certain binoculars that have kind of like an erecting prism area, but if you think about it, if you were to put this telescope on a mount and point it near the zenith or near the top point of the sky, you're going to really hurt your neck a lot. So it's kind of good for within a certain range.
For beginners, so would you recommend a telescope over binoculars, or would you start with?
Well, I always tell people this, and some people will disagree with me, but I always say start with binocular, like a good pair of astronomical binoculars, something like this, or within this range, right? And then see how many times you take it out during the year. If you take it out like 1 or 2 times during the entire year, probably wouldn't invest in a telescope, because you're like, a telescope is a lot more work to actually take out. So if you're not that interested in astronomy enough to take out your binoculars, probably not going to work so well with a telescope. And again,
if the binoculars whet your appetite to see more and better stuff.
But everyone else has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, that's really standard advice, but it depends a little bit on your personality. My personality is a little bit different. I was really motivated by getting the better views that you get through the telescope.
So was I.
That made me super interested, and that made me want to keep going. The views that I got through binoculars were not sufficient to whet my appetite to see more, the same way
more like you,
that getting my telescope was. So binoculars are great. You can see a lot. That will whet your appetite. I don't know, you mentioned something about renting telescopes from the RASC. Back in the day when I was active with that, it was actually, if you were a RASC member, you could borrow the telescopes.
Yeah, yes, you have to be a member.
Yeah, so joining the RASC for the $80-some a year, whatever, and then borrowing a telescope from their loaner library is a really super good way to determine whether that's something that you actually want to spend money on, and how interested you're going to be.
And I mean, you can keep them for a couple of months. There were no hurry really to get them back. And you can try different ones. That's the great thing too. You can try different ones and see which you like better. So yeah, like telescope stores don't let you do that so much.
Okay, somebody said they're having trouble getting the link right now. So can we put it somewhere where they can get it later? And I guess
I'll put it on my Facebook group, and also I send it to you, Harvey, and then maybe you can you can even put it on the Nature website.
Yeah, we can probably post it under the YouTube video or something, as long as you don't mind that link being very public.
Not at all.
Okay, good. Then we can do that. So when we post it on YouTube, we'll probably put the link underneath the video as well, so then people
Sure.
can access it from there.
So, all right. Well, I think we're just about out of time.
Oh, I can check.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one more question. Where do you like to go for night sky viewing, whether local or further away? So you mentioned Porto Cove. I kind of like Hope Slide if I want a really nice dark sky site. It's a bit closer than Manning Park. Any other places you would suggest? My yard is another good spot because it's not far away. I can just drag the telescope out there.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Once you get bigger scopes, you might want to go to a dark sky location, but it can be quite a trek to get out some places. My favorite place is to go up. I'm sure a lot of you know where Joffre Lakes is, up on the Duffy Highway. That is pretty much as dark as you can get. But from Vancouver, it's about a 3-hour drive. For me, from Squamish, it's only
To me,
about
the
an hour and a
best
half.
place, it's 40 minutes to drive to Porto Cove, and it's pretty darn dark out there. There's a little bit of mountains obscuring maybe the eastern part, so you might not see things until about an hour and a half after they actually rise above the horizon. But that's a small price for me to pay. The other way, you're looking at ocean, so you got a pretty clear horizon there, and it's very dark. They had a very annoying light on for a while, but we sort of wrote and complained through RASC, and they kind of got rid of
Yeah, they did. They got rid of the light, all the lights on the dock, and the light that's in the parking lot that was annoying. They turned it into a motion light, so that really helped.
Oh, that's a big improvement from the last time I was there.
Yeah. So it was kind of not so good for a while because you were even closing it at 11 and turning all these annoying lights up. And finally, we got them to stop all that with Lee's help. And so now it's much better again.
Oh, that's super. I mean, I'll consider going there again.
Yeah. I think we met you out there once. Actually, didn't we?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
So Harvey, we can get that list of places and include that with the video.
Sure. I'll try to remember to post that with the video.
And I know you mentioned before the thing started, star parties. I gather that the Okanagan one isn't happening, but I found that that's also a good place for beginners to go and get.
So that's not quite true. The one at the Mount Kobau Star Party is still running. It didn't run last year because there were fires quite nearby, and they were concerned. They've had to evacuate that mountain in the past because of a fire, and there's only one road in and out. And so this year it didn't happen. But it should be running this summer, barring an unpleasant fire situation again. So that's really great. The star parties are a really good place to go and learn if you have your own equipment and you're bringing it there. The star parties are not a public outreach event. They're for everybody who's there pretty much has their own gear, and they're taking their vacation time to go explore the night sky in a semi-serious way. And they're happy to share their expertise with other people who are in the same boat, but they're not happy to have long lineups of people at their telescope trying to take their observing time from them. So it's a slightly different thing than when you have a public outreach event where we're there trying to show people the night sky.
That said, they were very nice to us when we were there, and people were offering, without being asked, offering to let us see things in there through their.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Even though we didn't.
And the Island Star Party is still running. The skies are not as dark there, but they do that, and they do a fair bit of outreach there. So they're really happy to have beginners and new people.
Sorry, which one was that?
The Island Star Party, it happens in Cowichan Valley.
And that's going to replace the Merit Star Party, which isn't happening. And there used to be a Merit Star Party as well, but that's no longer. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for presenting, guys. That was really great.
I'm glad you enjoyed.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
And hopefully you'll get some more people checking out the RASC and the Starry Nights events, and maybe we'll see you at Porto Cove sometime.
And if you have any additional questions in the future, just send me an email. We can send it at, just go to the RASC website and you can see there's a bunch of different emails. You can send it to any email, really.
So that's rasc-vancouver.ca.
Yeah, that's right. It might be
Okay.
.com. I can't remember if it's .ca.
No, I think you're right. I think it's
Yeah.
.com.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.